cake was already ordered. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the money, not even the humiliation of it, just the cake. A 3-tier lemon almond cake with buttercream roses, because my daughter had mentioned once, years ago, that she thought fondant looked like plastic. I had written that down in a little notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer, right next to my reading glasses and the crossword puzzles I never finished. I am 64 years old. I retired from 31 years of nursing in the spring, and I spent the first month of my retirement sitting in my living room in Savannah, Georgia, not quite sure what to do with my hands. My whole life I had structured around being needed, 6 a.m. shifts, double shifts, covering for colleagues when their children were sick, because mine was already grown. You learn to move through the world in a certain way when you spend 3 decades keeping other people alive. You learn to be useful before you learn to rest. My daughter, my only child, got engaged in October. Her name is the first thing I want to say, and the last thing I want to say. So I'll just call her my daughter and leave it at that. She called me on a Tuesday night, and I could hear the excitement in her voice the way I used to hear it when she was 7 and had lost a tooth, pure and bright and spilling over. She told me his name. She told me he'd proposed at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, and that he'd had the waiter bring the ring in a little box on a dessert plate. I sat down on my kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and cried the happy kind of tears that feel like they come from somewhere deeper than your chest. I said, "Baby, tell me everything." And she did. For 2 hours, she told me everything. I should tell you about him, my son-in-law-to-be. I'll call him what he always asked me to call him. Just son, he'd said, with that easy smile of his. He was from a family up in Connecticut, old money in the quiet way, the kind you don't talk about but you feel in the way people carry themselves. His mother had strong opinions about table settings. His father played golf with the kind of men who made decisions about other people's lives in back rooms. They were not unkind people. They were just people who had never needed anything from anyone, and so they moved through the world with a looseness that only comes from never having had to hold on tight. The wedding was set for the following September. From the very first conversation, it was clear that his family had ideas. Big ideas. They wanted a venue in Charleston. They wanted a specific caterer. They wanted a photographer who was apparently very sought after and whose name I couldn't find anywhere online, but who cost more than I made in 3 months of nursing before my last raise. Every conversation about the wedding had a shape to it, the shape of decisions already made, waiting to be announced. I didn't push back. That is not my nature. I was raised by a woman who said that the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of noise is stay quiet and keep your eyes open. My mother had been gone 11 years, and I still heard her voice like she was standing right behind me. I asked my daughter what she needed from me. She said what every daughter says, "Mom, I just want you there." I held on to that. I want you there. The venue his parents chose held 250 guests and had a wraparound veranda that looked out over the water. The rental fee alone was $14,000 for the weekend. They covered that. They covered the rehearsal dinner. They covered the bar package and the florals and the photo booth company that the younger cousins apparently required. What fell to me by gentle and gradual agreement was everything else. The cake, $4,000. The wedding favors, handmade honey jars from a local apiary, which my daughter had seen on Pinterest and fallen in love with, $2,200. The shuttle service for guests who were staying at the hotel 2 miles away. The hair and makeup for my daughter and her 3 bridesmaids the morning of the wedding. The brunch that would happen the day after, for close family, at a restaurant I had to book 6 months in advance. I did not do this because anyone asked me to, exactly. I want to be honest about that. I did it because when I saw my daughter's eyes light up at something, I wanted to be the person who made it real. I had spent 31 years making things okay for strangers. I wanted to make something beautiful for mine. I went into my savings, not all of it, but enough. I kept a spreadsheet on my laptop. Not because I'm the kind of person who keeps spreadsheets, I am not, but because the numbers were large enough that I was afraid I'd lose track. Every few weeks I'd open it and look at it and then close it before I could feel too much about it. I told myself I would rebuild. I was 64, not 80. I still had time. The planning went on for almost a year. I drove to Charleston twice to see the venue in person. I sat across from the cake designer with my daughter for 2 hours, tasting samples on little forks, laughing when we both reached for the lemon almond at exactly the same moment. I addressed envelopes by hand because my daughter said printed labels felt impersonal. I have arthritis in my right hand. I addressed 212 envelopes anyway, stopping every 20 minutes to run my hand under warm water. His mother, to her credit, was organized. She had a binder. She ran the planning calls with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. She had 3 times for his older siblings. She was never rude to me. She was something subtler than rude, which is that she was never quite talking to me. She'd make a decision and inform my daughter, and my daughter would tell me, not in a malicious way, just in the way that water flows downhill, the path of least resistance. I noticed, and I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was September. What mattered was my daughter in that dress. I'd seen the dress exactly once at the fitting when she'd stepped out of the dressing room, and my whole chest had collapsed in the best possible way. She looked like herself, but distilled, like someone had taken everything I loved about her and pressed it into a single image. I sat in a little chair in the corner of the bridal shop and pressed my fingers to my mouth and did not let myself make a sound, because some feelings are too large for a room. That was in April. The email came in June. Not a call. An email. My daughter sent it on a Wednesday morning, and I read it at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold beside me. The subject line was about the wedding, important, which is how I knew before I even opened it that something had shifted. The email was long, carefully worded. She said that she and my son-in-law had been talking, and that his family had some concerns about the dynamics of the wedding party and the seating and the way the day was organized. She said they felt, and she wanted me to understand that she was caught in the middle, that this was very hard for her too. They felt that it would be better if the day were kept to immediate family and their side of the guests. She said there wasn't room. She said the guest list had been reevaluated. She said my name was no longer on it. I read that email 4 times. The 5th time, I got up and stood at my kitchen window and looked out at my backyard, at the bird feeder I'd forgotten to fill for 2 weeks, at the oak tree that had been there since before I bought the house. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go completely cold, long enough for the light to change. I want to be very clear about something. My daughter did not say she agreed with this decision. She said she was caught in the middle. She said it was hard for her too. She said she hoped I would understand. I thought about the 212 envelopes. I thought about my right hand. I thought about the cake. I thought about sitting in that little chair in the bridal shop, pressing my fingers to my mouth. Then I went and opened my laptop. The cake deposit. I called the bakery. Spoke with the woman I'd been working with for 4 months, who knew my daughter's name and her preference for buttercream, and the fact that she was allergic to strawberries. I told her there had been a change in plans. She was sorry to hear it. The deposit was refundable within 90 days of the wedding date, she confirmed. We were within 90 days. The honey favors. The apiary was run by a man named Roy, no, not Roy, a kind man outside of Beaufort who had been so pleased that someone wanted to feature local honey at a Charleston wedding. I called him, told him the same thing. Change of plans. He was disappointed but gracious. He said he could resell them at the farmer's market and that he hoped everything was all right. The brunch reservation. I called the restaurant. Released the reservation. The hair and makeup. I sent a message to the stylist. The shuttle service. I called the company and cancelled. One by one. Not in a rage. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect a woman to be screaming when she is burning something down. I was not screaming. I was methodical. I was the same way I used to be when a patient coded, hands steady, mind clear, moving in the order that things needed to be moved through. You do not panic in the middle of a crisis. You act. Each cancellation returned something to my account. I tracked it in the spreadsheet. In a new column, I labeled returned. When I was finished, I closed the laptop. I sat for a while with my hands in my lap and let myself feel what I felt, which was something I could not name exactly, not quite grief, not quite anger. Something older and quieter than either of those things. The feeling of a woman who has been paying attention for 64 years and has finally let herself admit what she's been seeing. I did not call my daughter that day. The next morning, I booked a trip. I had always wanted to see the great Smoky Mountains in the fall. I had told myself for 20 years that I would go one day, and one day had never arrived because one day is the most reliable lie we tell ourselves. I had a friend, a woman I'd worked alongside for 15 years, sharp and funny, and the only person I knew who could make a 12-hour shift feel bearable, and she had mentioned just weeks before that she'd always wanted to do the same thing. I called her. I said, "How do you feel about October in the Smokies?" She said, "Give me 20 minutes to pack." We went for 10 days. We rented a cabin in Gatlinburg with a back porch that looked out over a ridge of trees so old they seemed like they had opinions. We sat out there every morning with our coffee, real coffee, not the break room kind, and watched the fog lift off the mountains so slowly it felt like the mountains were deciding whether or not to show themselves. We drove the Blue Ridge Parkway on a Tuesday when the leaves had turned and the whole world was red and gold and amber. And my friend pulled the car over at a scenic overlook, and we just stood there like two women who had finally run out of places to be. We ate dinner at restaurants that required reservations, and we made them for two, just us. And we ordered whatever we wanted, and we split dessert, and we laughed until one of us almost choked on more than one occasion. I turned my phone off at 9 p.m. every night. On the 5th day, a message came through from my daughter. She had tried to call. She had heard from the bakery, apparently, when she called to confirm a detail, that things had been cancelled. The message was long and panicked and contained the phrase, "How could you?" more than once, and also the phrase, "I know things are complicated, but..." I read it. I thought about it. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. There is a version of the story where I would have called her back immediately, where I would have explained myself, defended my decisions, negotiated, apologized. For most of my life, I would have done exactly that. I would have swallowed the thing that was sitting in my chest and picked up the phone and made things smooth, because that is what I had been trained to do by decades of caregiving, and before that by a girlhood in which keeping the peace was the highest virtue a woman could have. But I was 64 years old, and I had just watched the fog lift off mountains that had been standing there for 300 million years, and something in me was simply done. I did not call her back that night. I called her when I was home, when I was rested, when I had thought carefully about what I wanted to say. We had a long and difficult conversation. She cried. I did not during the call. I had already done my crying, alone on a cabin porch with a cup of coffee and no audience. I told her that I loved her more than anything in the world, and that I would continue to love her more than anything in the world, and that those two things had nothing to do with the other thing I needed to say, which was that what had been done to me was not acceptable. She said his family had pressured her. I said I understood that. She said she didn't know how to stand up to them. I said I understood that too, and that it was something she would need to learn because she had chosen to marry into them. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not the sorry that means nothing. The other kind. The kind that costs something. I said, "I know you are, baby." We talked for another hour after that. We talked about what the wedding would look like now, with what remained of the budget and what his family was still providing, and about what I was and was not willing to contribute going forward, and about what it meant to be a mother who loved her child and still had a right to her own dignity. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. It was long overdue. The wedding happened. I was there. They worked it out with his family. I don't know exactly how, and I did not ask, because there are boundaries that are healthy, and that was one of them. I sat in the front row in the dress I had bought myself on the third day in Gatlinburg, navy blue with small pearl buttons down the sleeve, and I watched my daughter walk toward a man who, I believe, genuinely loves her, even if his family is a piece of work. The cake was different. A simple buttercream sheet cake from a local baker they found on short notice. My daughter told me later it was actually delicious. The honey favours weren't there. I thought about Roy, the man from Beaufort, with his bees and his farmer's market. I hope he sold every jar. When my daughter walked past me at the start of the ceremony, on the arm of a friend who'd agreed to walk her down the aisle, she turned her head and looked at me for just a moment. Just a second, the way she used to look at me when she was small and nervous and needed to know I was there. I nodded. She smiled. That is what I kept, that 1 second, that nod, that smile. Everything else, the spreadsheet, the 212 envelopes, the 4 months of planning calls, the money, it's all just the tax I paid to learn something I probably should have learned sooner. That you can love someone with everything you have and still require them to treat you with respect. That those two things are not in conflict. That the woman who raised a child and worked 31 years and addressed envelopes with arthritic hands in the quiet of her own kitchen deserves to be seen. My friend and I are already planning the next trip. She wants to do the Pacific Coast Highway. I've never been to California. I think it's time.